Really here we're talking about, a starting point for these organizations to get them in the mindset of understanding and then addressing being actionable with cybersecurity. Overall, though, they're intended for anybody. If you're on the call and this information that you see here is secondhand, you live and breathe this, then I'd ask maybe you look to your community, your partners, your friends, colleagues, et cetera. Maybe you send them the link to this. Maybe you send them the PDF. You put it out on your own, partner network, social media, whatever your avenue is. We just always look to organizations to help amplify the message and, appreciate, again, this opportunity here. So, again, I'll go over sort of just the background, and then we've received a number of questions since we released this, so I just, I'll address those kind of upfront questions we have. So, the essentials, again, intended to help organizations really understand the business case for thinking of cyber risks within the context of their other organizational risk management practices, right? Put it on a level if you're concerned as a small business, about, legal risk, your competition, financial, whatever the case may be, intellectual property risks, put that cybersecurity risk and that hat on and put that on a level that's equal to those, and, kind of have that heightened level of awareness around cybersecurity and, the potential risks to your business. We really want to help these organizations learn the essential elements of, being cyber ready, what that means for your organization, building the culture of that, and, ultimately understanding the steps that you should take, to be ready, to be prepared, to be aware of the concerns that are out there, and then kind of learn what actions are leader-driven, and then actions that should be taken either in consultation if you have an IT staff, if you have an outsourced service provider, kind of that balance between what, we see as a leader side of this and then what we see as kind of the IT professional as just a general term there. The features of the essentials themselves, set of easy to adopt and understand community-endorsed practices that really form that basic level of cybersecurity practice. And it answers the question that CISA had been hearing for some time is from stakeholders, again, especially that small business, smaller organizations, where do I start? What should I do? So we're really hopeful that this comes across as that and, written for those with limited background or experience in cybersecurity or the terminology, but though are still responsible for safeguarding their organization. So, the language in it is intentionally supposed to be, easy to deal with, that kind of basic piece. As I said before, the infographic itself has two parts. We've got a guiding principle for leaders to develop that culture of security, and then specific actions for those folks and their IT professionals to put that culture into action. We've often been asked, how did we develop these essential activities? The practices were derived from our cybersecurity division. They've got years of operational data and experience in incident response, our CDM programs, vulnerability management, amongst their other sources that were, used to inform and develop this background. And then that operational data was then taken and put into the language that you see on the infographic itself. The essentials are not intended to be a new framework or supplant anything that's out there, but rather really be a quick reference guide for leaders and their IT staff. So, we certainly recognize there's a wealth of information out here, all kinds of codes of practice, recommendations, how-to guides, et cetera. The essentials just, look at it as that quick reference guide, kind of the basic steps. We work with stakeholders to develop this initial piece of the campaign. Various stakeholder groups. We held a couple focus group sessions with small business community groups, and that feedback was used to inform and create this final product that you see here. Kind of finally on the frequently asked questions / background, the essentials again reinforce this as a campaign, not just a single product, set and forget. Our focus is really on that message, why smaller organizations need to think about cyber risks and then what they can do to prepare and what kind of actions we can take. So, kind of you see on the WebEx here, the essentials piece, the leader's guide, talk about this really at a high level. Managing cyber risks, can you're talking about your ability to operate, your ability to continue business if something really bad were to happen. Your reputation, customer trust are things to think about. Your bottom line and your organization survival. It may sound a little, over the top, but a really bad event, has the potential to, stop operations. And if it's a smaller organization, are they able to sustain? Are they able to continue? So things to think about. Managing these risks, requires you to be ready, aware, have plans in place. So from the leader's guide perspective, there's sort of 6 buckets. Looking at yourself as a leader, you're going to be the one driving the cybersecurity strategy, the investment, the culture, building capacities and capabilities for your organization. You obviously have your staff, developing that security awareness and vigilance for them. You have your systems, which house, your critical assets and applications. We use words like, then the second one, your surroundings, knowing what's on your network, knowing who's on your network, paying attention as a leader to the data that you have, making sure that you have backups, avoiding the loss of any critical information to your operations. And then finally, kind of your actions under stress, as a leader, driving the planning, making sure that, there's, those incident response plans or those contingency plans, and that you're able to operate and have the ability to restore if something bad were to happen to your operational environment. So I'll kind of jump, if you want to jump to the IT professional guide on the next slide there, Daniel, I'll spend a little bit more time going to some, detail here with respect to these practices. So the IT professional guide, could be used as, again, a starter conversation for your staff. Maybe you as a leader are also the IT professional. That's certainly the case, but maybe you do have a staff, but maybe you have, outsourced some of this, and this could be a guide for a conversation, but it is intended to be actionable. So again, if you're the CEO and also the, IT security and IT operations person, well, you may be looking at this on your own. But at the very top, we have the language booting up. Simply, things to do first. If nothing else, we're hoping that you have, robust backup of your data. You're using multi-factor authentication whenever it's possible. And then, doing patch and update management, patch. It's very important. Today, kind of timely to have this conversation given, the major notice of a Patch Tuesday here, a critical one, even government issuing an emergency directive for federal departments and agencies, and then end of life today for Windows 7. So, it kind of dovetails into the next pieces. But, again, starting here, the booting up, as you move down, I'll go kind of left to right here. Again, looking at, yourself as the leader driving that strategy, investment and culture, kind of the basic premise for this one is, awareness of cybersecurity is going to drive that strategy for, operational resilience. And, that strategy obviously will require investment of time and money to build capacity, build capabilities, drives actions, and then these actions are what ultimately can build a culture of cybersecurity for your organization. Some of the foundational pieces here that we're trying to reinforce is, approaching cyber as a business risk. As I mentioned, organizations face, all kinds of business risks, and, we're just recommending that, you raise the level of cybersecurity and paying attention to that on par or equal to those other ones, put that level of importance on it in your day-to-day operations. Understanding and then determining how much of your organization is dependent on your information technology, have business plans around that, have contingency plans around that in the event of a, cyber incident. Know what your most critical assets are, and if there was an outage, what that impact is to your business. Certainly ask the questions of yourself, of your organization, to understand the what if situations, if this happened, then what, kind of really have that as your thinking to help you plan. Investing in this basic cybersecurity, these essential actions, invest in cybersecurity for your organization, for your staff. Use the essentials, as I said, to have this conversation with your staff, ask your business partners, your vendors, your managed service providers, et cetera. Conduct these risk assessments to kind of identify and prioritize what the resources are and, where you should invest in cyber. Ultimately have, build a network of trusted relationships, This can give you access to timely cyber threat information, help you maintain awareness of the overall cybersecurity environment, threats that are out there, look at available communities of interest. We're on a call today around a community of interest through NCSA, things like information sharing and analysis centers, CISA. There's, lots of resources out there, media organizations, law enforcement, et cetera. The list goes on, but having that network of what, you trust and, where you kind of get your trusted information is going to be really important. Finally, kind of wrapping up on the driving strategy, investment, and culture is just the development of cybersecurity policies, documenting what your requirements are, what's permissible, what's not permissible, and then, promulgating that throughout your organization. I'll move on to the one to the right. As far as practices, your staff, so, developing that security awareness culture, that vigilance, begins with having a, trained, equipped, and participatory workforce. Premise at hand here, probably, many of you may have heard this before, but, staff can often be that first line of defense. And, a staff that has, understands the basic skills and is practicing that cybersecurity hygiene is really important. Some of the foundational actions here are, leveraging basic cybersecurity training, improve their understanding of concepts, terminology, activities associated with implementing things like essentials or other best practices that are out there. Leading a culture of awareness, encouraging your employees to make good choices, do the right thing, learning about the risks of phishing, business email compromise, taking steps to really raise the awareness of what these things are. If there's the ability to conduct, phishing exercises, social engineering exercises, within your organization, have them understand what it looks like to receive a business email compromise, and then, what's right, what to do in those situations, empower those employees to make good decisions is very important. There's a wealth of training resources that are available, both public, private sector, take advantage of those things through, professional associations, academic institutions, private sector, government, et cetera. Lots of information that's out there. You can get on that. And then, leverage awareness of current events. The news media is obviously out there. There's, social media. Again, we're on this call today to talk about that. So, all very important things to do. As we move over to the essential practice around your systems, this is all about protecting the systems that you have, especially those key, critical, high-value assets and applications, the things that are really at the crux of your operations. And if they were to fail, or if you were to have an incident and those things aren't available, you're going to have that bad day. Basic premise at hand here is, information data is probably the, lifeblood of your organization and could be one of the more, valuable of your intangible assets. But, it's all about knowing where that information resides, knowing what applications and networks store and process that information, and then, building the security around those things. Knowing, as far as like kind of foundational actions, knowing what's on your network, you really should have a strong inventory of hardware, software assets, know what's in play, know what's at risk, and then, managing and maintaining that over time. These things, they don't have to be complicated. It could be something as simple as a spreadsheet, but, really maintaining what you own is and what is on your network is going to be important. Obviously we're going to encourage leveraging, automatic updates for all operating systems, third-party systems, maintaining a currency with those things, so you're not operating on something that's end of life. Again, go back to today, there's a giant Patch Tuesday release, Windows 7 becoming end of life, and, we still read reports, there's lots of organizations that are still on Windows 7. That's no longer going to be supported. So, again, just, really enforcing the patch, and doing that. As you kind of move down the line here, secure configurations for all hardware, software assets, look at your, vendor product guides, resources out there. There's no shortage of guidance on how to implement secure configurations, so take advantage of that. Remove any unsupported, unauthorized hardware and software from your systems. so you know what's there, you know what you can focus on, the critical applications. Again, just going back to that, staying on those supported hardware, software platforms so that you can receive updates, you can receive those patches, and, act quickly on those things. Recommending, leveraging your email and web browser security settings, protecting against, spoofed emails, web attacks, et cetera. Again, final piece here on your systems, really, if you can, things like application integrity, whitelisting, so only allowing what you've deemed to be approved and consistent with what your policies are, allow nothing else, kind of monitor the integrity of your applications. So just, super important there as well. So, again, just going back, knowing what's critical to your organization, keeping that inventory, keeping those things updated, all about keeping those systems in check. As we move one more to the right, kind of your surroundings, and, understanding your digital workplace, managing your operational footprint, access, and identities, knowing who belongs on your systems and how those systems are accessed and operated, to include any third parties, any external network connections you have. Our basic premise here is that, the authority and the access that you grant your employees, customers, et cetera, into your environment needs limits. So it'd be the same as, who you're allowing into your physical workspace. The same thing should go to your, digital workspace. Setting those approved access privileges, establishing your procedures, is going to require knowing who is actually accessing your technology assets, and, to what level access they have. So having, policies, procedures, technologies that ensure that, only your authorized users are granted those minimum privileges needed is important. Certainly pay attention to identifying and deactivating any unused accounts, eliminating shared accounts and removing unnecessary privileges, concept of least privilege, just what you need to do, have the access you need for your job and nothing more. Recommending, monitoring and analyzing user activities for, anomalous behavior, things like access attempts out of normal operating procedures or hours or, unusual locations. Consider, again, stronger mechanism than just, username, password. This goes back to the, multi-factor authentication, highly recommended. Maybe if you need to prioritize, the privileged users first, remote access, but, whenever possible and it works within your operational, multi-factor authentication is going to be important. Recognizing user identity and access management is still challenging, but, there's not a one size, fits all solution, but, have a strategy that works for your organization. Maybe that's a phased approach over time. But, ultimately, know who's on your network, inventory those network connections, user accounts, vendors, business partners, et cetera, cloud access, have that culture of access and admin permissions based on need to know, least privilege, have policies and procedures that address, changes in user status. So, if you have a person transferring out of the organization, you're quickly, deactivating those accounts. Someone's terminated or they're, moving on to a different role for whatever reason. Again, reinforce that multi-factor authentication and then unique passwords for all accounts. I think this, goes for both your, personal life and, professional organization life, goes without saying. So we'll move over to then, your data. You're protecting and backing up information, have backups that help you avoid the loss of data that's critical to your organization and your operations. Basic premise here, really, even the, best cybersecurity measures in place, things happen, right? And, we really want to be able to have folks learn to protect that information that they have with backups, have those ability to recover and restore those system, network, and data from known good backups. Actions here around protecting and backup information is, again, not only kind of goes to the other one, knowing who's on your network, but knowing what information resides on your network. So really have a good feel for where your critical information is, what systems and applications it resides on, and then, know what's happening on your network. As much as you can, managing your network, managing your perimeter components, your host devices, kind of knowing where your data at rest is and in transit. Learning how your data is protected. So you may have encryption requirements. You may have data in the cloud. You may have data with third parties. If that's the case, know how it's protected in all those different avenues. Leveraging malware protection. And then, establishing regular automated backups, testing those backups, having the ability to, restore as needed, maintaining maybe a, kind of an air-gapped backup as well that's protected and offline is important. Protecting those things with, you can protect your backup, maybe physical security, maybe encryption. Make sure you have the ability to test those backups again, recover. You do that on a somewhat frequent basis. Protecting that data and is always critical. Final practice I have here is, kind of actions under stress, preparing to respond and recover, limit damage, have the ability to quickly restore to normal operations if something does happen. Basic premise at hand here is, planning and prepare and conducting drills for cyber incidents. You may have emergency plans for, a fire drill or a natural disaster. Do that corollary with your cybersecurity or cyber incident. Make the reaction to some kind of outage, just an extension of your other business contingency plans. Having these plans, procedures, train staff, maybe have some assigned roles, responsibilities, and, really important, a communication plan around that is going to be important. Foundational actions here, maybe think about conducting business impact assessments, allow you to, prioritize the resources that you have, know which systems you need to recover first and, get you up and going again and something bad happens. Developing internal reporting structures. You want to have, who's on first, what do we do to detect, communicate, contain attacks. Again, have those incident response, disaster recovery plans. These things have roles, responsibilities. You should be testing these often. Think about who to call for help. Again, those could be, outside partners, vendors, government and industry. You could have technical advisors on call, retainers, law enforcement. Just kind of think about these things in advance and, have a bit of a playbook and, again, part of your incident response plan. As you maybe get slightly more advanced from essentials, think about things like containment measures to limit the impact of an incident if it does happen. This may include isolating segments of your network, of infected workstations, for example. Maybe you need to take down something in production if it's impacted, or reroute traffic to kind of unaffected infrastructure. Again, high-level view of the essential practices and the background there, but I, kind of wanted to set the stage of, how we're seeing that, a leader side of this and then a practitioner side of these practices. And again, whether this is a conversation starter for you to a outsourced provider or something that you're driving internally, I just wanted to be able to go through that. High level in terms of, what's next for our cyber essentials. If you want to just kind of follow along, CISA.gov/cyber essentials is where we house this. You can download the PDF. You can, print it, share it on your networks, print it, put it up on your wall at work, whatever works for you guys. Reinforce again, this is intended to be the first of many releases for us. It is part of our, broader campaign over this next year, 2020. We want to continue to incorporate feedback from the audience and partners, continue to have future supplemental essentials products and resources. We may have other, specific areas that we're calling something essentials over the next year. We're looking at that. Shorter term, we want to be able to work on a toolkit for each of these vertical areas that I just went through. That'll have, more information for understanding the business case for these practices, have a bit more of the, technical information for implementing. So you wouldn't just be able to hear my voice. We'll have, one-pagers for each of these to kind of follow along. And then, direct readers to the resources for these essentials. I mentioned it up front, but, recognizing that there's a laundry list of resources out there in the universe and, some really, really good stuff that's out there. And we want to be able to highlight that. So, that's one of our goals. One of the next documents we're going to be looking at is kind of a, key steps. If you're going to go past the essentials, obviously starting with, do the cyber essentials, but, not only, staying aware of cyber threats, a little bit more on approaching the cyber as a business risk, things like using the NIST Cybersecurity Framework if you're ready to move up, developing and training your workforce, and then, sharing information with trusted partners, conducting exercises. So, that's going to be some things that are coming out here over the next couple months and throughout the next year. Our ask is obviously help us amplify the message. We're doing that today. Partners like NCSA are instrumental and wonderful partners in helping us do that. But, help us build out the toolkit. If you know of how-to guides already, easy to understand implementation guidance, existing resources, we'd love to hear about it. Examples include, NCSA, NIST, Center for Internet Security. You could go on and on. There's lots of good information out there. So, I gave you the background on the campaign, how we got here, some next steps. Pay attention to today. It's, there's a big Patch Tuesday. If you go to CISA.gov, there's a activity alert on today's Patch Tuesday. And, thank you. There's some resources out there. You can, obviously, CISA.gov, the Cyber Essentials. If you were ever needing to report an incident, CISA.gov, at the upper right, there's a yellow button that says report, or the direct link here. We have a number of insights products that have been released lately, one on the most recent one on the Iranian tensions, geopolitical threats. There's ransomwares, other things. And then if you want to sign up for CISA alerts, current activity bulletins, et cetera, that is there. Again, if you ever, want immediate feedback on something and you need to report, you have a concern, that report button, I'd point you there. If you have questions that are specific to Cyber Essentials, it is CISA Essentials at CISA.dhs.gov. That would not be for incidents, but if you want to, that'll get to me. And, if you have questions about the actual essentials themselves, or, want to feedback, whatever the case may be, you can shoot me an email and we'll get back to you. Just give us a day or so on those. But, just want to thank you for your time and pass it back over to you, Daniel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kevin. I really appreciate it. And I'm going to include the email address that for individuals who want to reach out to Kevin, learn more about the CISA Essentials. Because we have about 2,500 people registered for this webinar, we thought it'd be best if we provide the URL or the email address so people can reach out directly to CISA and Kevin's team so you can ask your questions about the essentials. And I also want to thank Kevin and your team for putting this resource together. A lot of small businesses don't have, they don't understand really what questions to start asking their vendors or their internal IT staff or themselves. So this is a great resource to do so and to get that ball rolling. So thank you, Kevin, and thank you for your continued collaboration between the National Cybersecurity Alliance and CISA.